Yeah, thank you all for coming along today. My name's Nathan. I'm part of the Bath and North East Somerset Faith Foundation. We're an organisation that raises awareness of certain causes and certain issues around Bath and North East Somerset. Today is poignant for a number of reasons. Today is Holocaust Memorial Day. It's 77 years, the 77th anniversary. And also, I think it's particularly poignant because this is the first time in 2 years we've actually done anything. It's been so difficult to meet up. So for me, I was absolutely determined to do this event today because it's so important that this is remembered. Back last summer, the Association of Jewish Refugees sent out an email across the country to say it's our 80th anniversary. We want to plant 80 oak trees around the country to mark the anniversary. And so Sarah Bevan is our patron. We had a chat about it and we jumped at the chance. We knew a play park where we could plant the tree, and that's the short story of how we've got to where we are today. So what's going to happen, the kind of choreography of this rainy event is I'm going to hand over to Micheal, and then Sarah's going to say a few words, and then Michael's going to unveil the plaque and the tree. And we're also, just to say, we're pleased to have other people along today. Councillor Lisa O'Brien, Chairwoman of Bath and North East Council, Councillor Karen Walker, another senior councillor on the council, representatives from the Jewish burial ground in Bath.
And Michael's cousin.
And yeah, they're cousins, and they met for the first time today. Isn't that wonderful? And a lot of you will discover a bit later on have similar stories, or your parents came from Austria in the 30s, and you've met here for the first time, so it's quite a very, very important day as well. So all of those 80 trees were sponsored by different people, and I have to confess the tree was bigger than I thought when it arrived in the post the other day. I thought it was a small sapling originally, but it's not. And the fact that it's this tall means that it's not actually a lot easier to plant. And we're hugely honoured that Micheal Hilsenrath has sponsored this tree and the plaque. It's come all the way from Finchley in London this morning. So Micheal, over to you to say a few words.
Thank you very much. Given the weather, yesterday was much nicer. I'll try and cut down, but if you know my family, they would tell you should have brought some chairs or something like that, because I am known to drone on. But first of all, let me thank everyone who's here. It's wonderful not just to come out on a day like today, but for this event. Some people have personal connections, but some people don't have personal connections. And that is even more special, that people have come and supported this. I'd also like to thank excuse me, the Bath and North Somerset Faith Forum, the local council, because the spot here is lovely, it's very peaceful, and it's secluded, so it's not on the main road, and I'm sure that this tree is going to grow and actually provide nice shade and nice leaves and everything else. So thank you very much for choosing this location as well. And I'd also like to thank the AJR, who are the other sponsors. Today, as Nathan said, we're planting one of 80 trees, and that is to commemorate the 80 years in which the AJR has been operated. They were formally founded just after the war to help tens of thousands of displaced Jewish people who came to the UK after the war. And in fact, today they deliver welfare, social and volunteer services. They do a lot more. In fact, I'm very privileged to be associated with them as a volunteer. So I don't work for them, and I'm not giving you a party piece, but it's a wonderful organization. I've seen services which they deliver. And they have also sponsored this program. And the program is designed to commemorate the lives of 80 people, 80 displaced people, or immigrants before the war, as a way of remembering them, but also as a way of them saying thank you back to the country which took them in and enabled them to make their own lives. In my father's case, it was the United States, but as I'm an immigrant to this country, I'd like to think that it's just an extended thank you, because if you couldn't get into the United States and there weren't people helping my father, like people help displaced people come to this country, then, well, you might be standing here today, but I certainly wouldn't be. So thank you all for that and for coming. I would like to spend a few minutes talking about my father. My father, William Hilsenrath, was born in Austria in October 1920, and he grew up in Vienna. And he lived there until March of '39 when he had to flee. And when he left on his own. He left his parents and 3 of his siblings. A younger brother, 2 years younger, managed to leave in December of 1938 and went to Palestine. He left, and he doesn't talk about the day. He never spoke about the day. I suspect it's because when he left, his parents and siblings had no papers. They had no idea if they would see each other again. And this is something that you'll hear often, not just before the war, but sadly it continues happening to this day. At the point of the Anschluss, he was in gymnasium. So part of the family was, I'm going to say, a typical Central European Viennese cultured family with a twist. They were strictly modern Orthodox. Now in Vienna at that time that wasn't that unusual, but normally you don't put those two phrases together. And in fact my grandfather, like many young men of his time and his place, or rather the Galician region in general, many Jewish men, and in this country as well, served in the First World War. My father served in Franz Josef's army, which is why he ended up in Vienna, from Comlia, where our families come from. My grandmother, whose family lived in the Ruhr region, her father managed a large estate, my great-grandfather, and came to Vienna for safety during the war. They met, and as some people like to say, the rest is history. He doesn't talk much about his time under the German Nazi regime, the German Austrian Nazi regime, I should say. But there were a few things he did regularly mention, and one of them was the night of the Anschluss, which he would have been 17 and a half at the time. And he remembered it vividly, and what he remembered mostly about it, aside from his fear, was the rapturous welcome that the German soldiers received when they came in. And he would comment, the only other time there was an even greater welcome was when Hitler paid a visit. He also talked about what it was like standing in the embassy, outside the embassy I should say, to hopefully get applications to apply for a visa to, in his case, Trump's case, get to the United States. And he would talk about possibility of 3 or 4 things happening, one of which was nothing happened. Everyone stayed in the queue all night, the doors opened, and people went in and they hopefully were successful in getting their application or whatever they needed from the embassy. The other thing was, they would stand all night, and then soldiers or police would come just at the time the door was opening, and they would make everyone go home. The other thing he saw is sometimes they would allow 3 or 4 people to go in and send everyone else home. And what he didn't witness, but he knew, fortunately he didn't witness, but what he knew about was, and sometimes trucks rolled up and everyone in the queue were taken away. He also talked about, because he was 18 at the time, walking with his father a few days after Peasedown. And in Vienna they lived in the 2nd district, and they lived on one road called Oberauergartenstraße. It was just over the Danube Canal in the 2nd district. And the street in which all the synagogues were on was parallel to it. And so they would walk through the same road each time when they went to synagogue, but on this day they went to walk and they walked down this road, which I think had more than 30 synagogues in it. And he would briefly describe the destruction and the devastation that he saw. In one of the synagogues, he sang in the choir. So that particular one meant a great deal to him. Of course, his father went to a different synagogue because that's how it worked. And the last thing we talk about regularly was the day that the Gestapo came and arrested him and took him to clean the streets. I'm sure you've seen photos or in films where they would round up Jewish people, and someone will have painted with oil-based paint anti-Nazi slogans on cobblestones, and they'd give the Jewish people buckets with the water and soap and a brush, and the purpose was to humiliate them. And there was a large crowd, and he would talk about the noise. Not that he could make out anything they were saying, we could imagine what they were saying, but he would just talk about the noise and his fear, of course. And the other thing he talked about for that particular instance, two things. One was the reason he was arrested by the Gestapo was because they came to the building. They had to move at that stage because they lived in the building, block of flats for civil servants. The maintenance person in front of the building when the Gestapo came, they asked him, of course, where are the Jews in the building, where are the Jewish people in the building, and they just knocked on the flats, and my father happened to be in the flat, and they arrested him. The reverse side of that is, he was on his knees, scrubbing the floor, and he recognized the Austrian Nazi in charge of this particular event, and it happened to be a gentleman, with whom they passed on this cut-through street I described earlier for years. Most of the time they saw him outside of his block of flats, and of course when you pass someone often enough, you nod or you say good morning, or it's not a relationship, but there's enough connection. And it so happens this person was in charge, and he called out to my father, or as my father said, he bellowed or yelled very loudly and said, "You come with me." And when my father used to tell me the story, he would say, "I expected to be taken around the corner and shot." And the gentleman said, "Grab the bucket and follow me." And he walked back to the gentleman's home, never saying a word, never looking at each other. And he turned around to my father, took the bucket and said, "Go home." So in a few hours perhaps, I don't know how long, on the one hand, someone he would have known turned him in, and on the other hand, someone he certainly knew by sight saved him that day, at great risk to the other person. Doesn't know his name. And those are the things he would talk about. He didn't talk about his time in New York, interestingly. He lived on his own without his family for 6 months. My grandparents and aunts and uncles managed to get out just after the war and came to New York. And the only thing he talked about was the efforts he made, like everyone else who was in his position, to try and get his family out. He was left with, I'll call them scars, but things that really were seared into him. One of them was closeness to family. Because of that experience, he always stayed close to his parents, either physically or visited them regularly, called them regularly. Siblings, he would take us as siblings, two tubes with a journey. It was an hour-and-a-half journey, close to my aunts and uncles, and therefore that generation of cousins were quite close. The other thing he kept was our fear of uniforms. It waned over time, but he always had that. He told me when he first came to the United States, he would look at someone in the police uniform and he would step back, and it took a while to come to terms with that. But on the positive side, what he did take with him was he took a deep understanding and appreciation for living in a country with a rule of law. He described his time in Austria under the Germans. There's a Hebrew word, hefker, which means abandon, but actually in context it means anarchy. And he would just say it was hefker, he would say. And what he was saying was, from his perspective, and for a Jewish person's perspective, that's what it was. There was no rule of law if you were Jewish. And you could turn the wrong corner, run into the wrong person, and you were in trouble. And he instilled that in me. And that's something which I still have, that I describe myself as a severe civil libertarian, as opposed to a libertarian, a severe civil libertarian. And I do, in my own small way, I try to at least give a voice to people who are being seriously persecuted, the Uyghurs, the Azaris, victims of slave labor, modern slavery, this country, everyone here must do the same thing. The other thing I try to do is help people understand, especially younger people, not the value, how precious it is that we're all living in this kind of society. I used to travel in the Soviet Union, and I traveled in the Eastern Bloc, and it was only then that I got the impact of what my father was talking about. An environment where you have to be careful what you said, who you said it to, who you were in some instances. And so I try to help certainly my children and anyone who's interested in listening to me to really understand and to remember that we have what we have today because of the big price which was paid in earlier generations, in my parents' generation, our parents' generation. And we can't possibly take it for granted. And having mentioned, this is why we're here. We're here to remember. And I was wondering, in thinking about today, what does it actually mean? And as it happens, a few weeks ago, in the weekly reading of the Bible in synagogue, they were reading the book of Genesis. They were reading the story of Joseph. And the particular part of the story they were reading was his time in prison. He'd worked for the Pharaoh. He ended up in prison, and he ended up with a baker and a winemaker who told him their dreams. I'm sure you know all the story. And in the end, I believe it's the baker who's restored, and as he's leaving to go back towards the Pharaoh, Joseph says, "Remember me to Pharaoh." And the text, the next verse in the text has interesting language. It says, "V'lo zachar," that the baker didn't remember Joseph. And then it ends the sentence and says, "Vayish kachehu," which means that he forgot him. So he didn't remember him, and then he forgot him. And I was at a lecture where the person giving the lecture was trying to draw a link between the two words because they mean relatively the same thing. And he said, so remembering, to remember is active. You have to work, one has to work at remembering. And if one doesn't remember, then one forgets. So then that's the message in the verse, and that's why everyone is here today. And with remembering, again, I read an article recently. It was a précis of an argument a prosecutor made to a jury in the opening case, and he was talking about choices. And I have butchered that argument, but I've praised it, but I've tried to make it relevant to all of us to today. And this is from, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to read this. This is from what the prosecutor started was choices are what we make every day, and the challenge is to make the right choice. So in our context here, what I've written, it's a choice to remain uneducated about what the Holocaust was, where it started, and how people responded or didn't respond. And it's a choice to refuse to apply the lessons from the Holocaust to what's happening today by ignoring signals and behaviors which we know lead to tragic places. And now, all the eyewitnesses are leaving. In fact, most of them have left us. And so we have two choices really. We have right choices and we have wrong choices. And the right choice for government, for educators, for community leaders, I exclude the people in this group today, genuinely I exclude, is to say we stand with and we believe survivors and victims. And we are committed to learning more and to reporting denial and to reporting Jewish and all racial hatred. The wrong choice is, amongst other things, denying the Holocaust, or worse than that, doing nothing. Knowing about it, learn from it, and then doing nothing. If we don't forget, it means, that if we forget, then whatever we have learned is gone, and the impact on societies around us, well, one doesn't really want to contemplate what that is. And so, I'll just close with these last two things. The Holocaust started with words, literally. It started with words. I'm sure everyone's familiar how the propaganda started, the government pronouncements, everything else. And essentially, they turned the Jewish people into, one educator described it, as socially dead certainly within Germany and other countries. And when someone is socially dead, if you think about when we talk about viruses or anything else, it's easier to do certain things to them that we would all consider immoral, quite frankly. And so we all need to remain vigilant when we hear these words. We know what it leads to. to try and do something about it. And everyone here is part of what I call the army, which has taken on responsibility for remembering and for making the right choices which accompany this responsibility. And for that, I'm very grateful. Thank you very much.